of the Spinnaker Summit. Glad you all could make it back. I thought yesterday was a phenomenal day, and I'm looking forward to another phenomenal day. Real quick, I heard some feedback through kind of the grapevine, I should say. And so before we start the panel, I just want to address one thing that kind of came up in the discussion is why the heck does Netflix open source Spinnaker? And it's probably the same reasons why every other company here open sources things. It's ultimately to affect recruiting. So our number one goal with Spinnaker is we want to be able to hire people that want to work on Spinnaker and are familiar with Spinnaker. Our second goal is for industry validation. If we had open source Spinnaker and everyone said that's the stupidest idea we've ever seen, then we'd know we were definitely doing something wrong. The third one, and this is why we're having the conference, is innovation. We have seen now that people, when they innovate on the Spinnaker platform, Netflix gets to take advantage of it. So that's why we're interested in you all contributing to Spinnaker. Even if we don't end up using that feature, someone else in the community will use it, and it's a win-win for everyone in the community. Whether it's you file a bug, you file some, or you create some documentation, or you ask us, how come you did this? Is there a better way to do it? All that is a win for the community. So if you had any doubts of why Netflix is kind of behind other companies using Spinnaker, it's because selfishly we'll get something out of it. Whether it be, again, innovations or just better documentation or what have you. And vice versa, when we innovate on Spinnaker, we're hopefully, hoping that you can take advantage of that as well. So happy to answer any more questions or concerns you have about kind of open source. But Netflix, suffice to say, has no plans to ever license Spinnaker or try to make money off Spinnaker. If you don't know this, Netflix is a content company. We are very interested in making sure you watch our content and have zero interest in licensing software. So without further ado, let's get started with the operating Spinnaker panel. And I will pass out some microphones. And why don't we go down the line and introduce ourselves? And do you want me to hold that? That's a big one, though. And I'll get some more. But let's go down the line, introduce ourselves, and maybe mention something about operating Spinnaker. Let's start with you on this one. So.
Hi, I'm Rob Fletcher. I work on the delivery engineering team here at Netflix. I've been working on Spinnaker for coming on for 3 years now, actually a little over 3 years. Principally, I was involved in writing the orchestration engine, Orca, and recently rewriting it to be a whole lot more easy to operate. So that's pretty relevant to today's topic, I think.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Sri. I'm a technology director in digital space in Capital One. We started using Spinnaker around 2 years back. We started our journey with Spinnaker. Now, obviously, in our DevOps space to mature our delivery pipeline.
Hi, I'm Andrew with Armory, and our company helps many, many other companies operate Spinnaker and be successful on their CD journey.
Hi, I'm Rob Zienert. I work on the delivery engineering team at Netflix. I've been working on it for about a year now, and I'm pretty passionate about automation, and so I've kind of got my hands in all sorts of operations stuff on the Spinnaker team here.
I'm Doug Campbell. I'm an engineer at GoGo. And we've been using Spinnaker since early 2016. And I handle a lot of the deployment and updating and configuration around our Spinnaker clusters.
Good morning. I'm Kevin Chung. I manage the DevOps and site reliability engineering teams for Under Armour at e-commerce. I've been using Spinnaker now for about a year with Kubernetes.
Hello, I'm Gard from Schibsted. We've been running Spinnaker in production in 1.5 years. Okay.
I'm Edwin with Target. We've been running Spinnaker in production since May of 2016. I think we started looking at it in March. I think we've now used 4 different cloud providers with it.
So why don't we start with what's the single most important thing about running Spinnaker in production for the people out here that are, let's say, just getting started or are running it in production or wondering kind of what's your biggest lesson learned?
Don't lose pipeline history. It actually matters to a lot of people. And so for the longest time, I didn't care about the stability of our Redis server. So every once in a while, we would lose it, but then a lot of teams would complain. I don't know, every once in a while we get lots of the white label errors and they're pretty cryptic, and I don't know, it's figuring those things out and making sure that the users never find those errors is pretty hard. So you just got to do a lot of end-to-end testing is what we found.
I would say actually having monitoring set up with the metrics that Spinnaker emits, as well as having log aggregation for all your services. Those have great indicators of the status of your system, and you can jump ahead of any problems that might be coming up.
One area is resiliency. That's where we learned our lesson, especially when you are rehydrating. We have a policy of rehydrating the AMI guidance. So Orca 3 is where we are thinking we are upgrading it now. The other thing is I concur with what was mentioned. Definitely monitoring space.
Yeah.
I think that the biggest problem we see, mention it a lot, but on AWS rate limiting, luckily there's a solution for it now, and it works pretty well. But the side effect,
What is that
I'm talking
solution?
about is service limits. So you can have Spinnaker rate itself before it interacts with AWS API. But the side effect is if you have a lot of infrastructure, a delay in your pipelines. So if you say you have 1,500 ASGs and you have a rate limit of 2 per second or something, that's going to take a very long time to refresh, and that's going to happen every 30 seconds. Takes a long time. So sometimes a pipeline that you think should take 2 or 3 minutes to deploy, you're looking at 15 minutes or so. So managing that has been the biggest challenge, I think.
I think for us, one of the most important things was understanding what each component is doing, what's writing what to Redis, who talks to who, what each config setting is doing. Once we started understanding things like Orca, which were black boxes for a while for us, we could provide a much more stable platform for our developers.
I think for us, we actually benefited in the sense that the implementation of Spinnaker was really kind of greenfield. So we were moving towards microservices in general, and we were able to just adapt rather than trying to migrate an existing application into Spinnaker. And to that point, I think the most important lesson that I learned was more around process engineering. Spinnaker is simply a tool, but it was working with our development teams to understand our overall software development cycle and where we could make efficient use and how flexible Spinnaker was that made it really useful for us.
For us, I think the most useful kind of monitoring we have is Spinnaker always triggers uploads to our RPM and Debian repositories to check that indexing is up and running, because if indexing is broken, the bakery stops and all pipeline stops. So we do that, and also we have pipelines that deploy every 10th or 15th minute to production to just see that the system is alive. Those two things is what we rely on to keep Spinnaker up. Basically, we have monitors on other things, but this shows that the system is working.
What about securing Spinnaker? So we did a OSS survey and asked how people were securing Spinnaker, and we got as many answers to that question as people responded. So tell us how, obviously everyone here is at a large enterprise where I suspect you just can't have it wide open for people to do it willy-nilly. So what are the strategies you all are employing to ensure that some random employee doesn't kill production? Or do you care about that?
Yeah, we care about that. We use Okta as the login service in Schibsted, and Spinnaker supports SAML login. So we use that in combination with the VPN. And also we use Halyard to control the access to the various accounts and applications. So Spinnaker is running in GA in Schibsted, which means that all developers get access when they join. And we're not afraid of it because it's up to the application owners and account owners to secure their accounts. But this is also a challenge because we lose insight on what people are doing because we are not allowed to access the accounts, so it's hard to do support. Yeah, and yeah, it's a closed down system for many teams, and then yeah, we don't get the people can't just browse it and see how people are working.
Yeah, so we currently employ either SAML for authn or authz, and then do SAML for authn and another Spinnaker cluster with Google Groups as the authz. We dabbled in LDAP for a little while, found that that was way too hard to configure at Target. And then, is there another one I haven't tried yet? Oh, OAuth 2. So there's 2 different versions of OAuth 2, which led to a headache that I had for a couple of weeks. And yeah, basically we ended up deciding on SAML because Ping ID just does it pretty well for us. We do run into a bug occasionally where if you log into another Ping ID service, it screws up the cookie somehow. But we found that the groups returned via AD end up working perfectly fine for authz within Fiat. So our goal in the long run is that all applications are created by our TAP API. They'll be locked down to a AD group provided by our application teams at app creation time. And then as well as the API will include the super admin group, which is our cloud platform engineering team, as well as a group for service accounts, which are the robots. So that way we ensure that we can still have read-write access to them so that we can help debug with teams, but as well as locking it down to a smaller set. So for the longest time we had every application was viewable by everybody who could log into Spinnaker. And so we trusted engineers for a pretty long time, but now that we're going to be moving Spinnaker to PCI compliance, to SOX compliance, we have to start thinking about how you do authz.
At Capital One, because of all the governance and controls that we have to make sure we are still compliant with all that stuff, we were using SAML and then the authentication authorization integrated with our the profile-based access, but it's also combined with every application when they're onboarding. We're checking whether it is the right engineering team has the right access, and all the other applications will have only view. The owning team for that application is the only one that have access to their application execution. And also, even that execution for production is combined with a lot of internal API-based calls before it gets to production access. So we made sure all those things are covered, combined with some internal APIs before going to production stage.
Yeah, we do similar things to all them, lock down the front end with SAML, but we also have X509 auth for all API access. And that certificate is only shared amongst us internally as a team and gets rotated pretty often. And with that, to manage compliance, we lock down all pipeline edits from the UI. So any edits have to go through our tooling so that we have full history of what's going in.
What is that tooling?
Do what?
What is that tooling?
Oh, it's called Formast. It's similar to the creative pipelines. It does some more around infrastructure creation, stuff like that. But we force all UI or pipeline changes to go through our tooling just so we have record of that for our auditors.
Similar to everyone else, we use SAML for UI authentication and then lock down certain AWS accounts with required group membership. So you have to be a part of particular Google groups to get access to, say, the management account, which is where Spinnaker actually runs. And then we have X509 certificates provided through either Lemur or Metatron. So individual developers get their own certificates that are short-term leases, and we can rate limit or give them specific access to individual accounts if they need to. But if you have a certificate, you're going to get basically write access to any of the accounts that we have that are not requiring a specific group.
So internally, we use GitHub OAuth, but a lot of the other users we see that they have a wide range of security lockdown measures. Some of them I've been surprised it's been fine for them to not have anything more than having their users log in and OAuth, and that means that all of the users can see all of the other app teams' applications and possibly deploy them. So I've been surprised that a lot more companies than I thought were okay with that. On the other end, that isn't good enough for a lot of companies, and sometimes we see they'll install Spinnaker into its own AWS account just for Spinnaker, and then control it kind of that way and control what accounts it's allowed to deploy to. Sometimes we see multiple instances of Spinnaker that each one has different rights. I think that's pretty much the spectrum.
And what would you say the overall cost is to operate Spinnaker? This was an interesting discussion at the 1.0 launch, I believe it was, we had in San Francisco, the meetup. And someone in the audience asked how many people are maintaining and operating Spinnaker at your particular company. And we asked the same question on the survey, and we got as many results as people answered. So I'm curious down the line, there's different companies being represented here. How many people are actually quote unquote operating Spinnaker? What do you think the cost is?
Yeah, I mean, we have a team of 8, and I think we all can support Spinnaker. Like, we had problems this morning, and everyone that knows it well is here. But the team was able to figure it out just fine. Probably about 2 or 3 of us are maybe 50% of time dedicated towards actually supporting Spinnaker. Once it's up and running, getting it set up was a lot of effort, and it took the whole team. But once it's up and running, it's not been too much maintenance, except for occasional, like Gate this morning had 100% CPU usage, and I think that's some JVM tuning we have to do on our end. So there's things that pop up like that, but there's very little now, and updates happen every once in a while. Once you have the process down, it goes pretty smooth.
We actually run Spinnaker within Kubernetes itself, along with a lot of our other sort of related build tools. So it's just another application that we're deploying out to a dedicated Kubernetes cluster simply for running Spinnaker, but also some of our other tooling like Jenkins and so forth. So it's an absorbed cost there for our process.
We're spending quite some time operating Spinnaker with like the last couple of months. It's been spent a lot of time upgrading Spinnaker and also changing how to do cloud accounts to support new certificate list requirement in 100 AWS accounts. We also have occasionally that people are deleting the roles in their, or access to roles in their accounts, so we have to debug that. And also we've had quite some Redis slowness because we are hitting 100 AWS accounts and 40 Kubernetes accounts, I guess. So it's by design, but we are hitting limits in Redis as well. Now it's fine, but it will surface in some weeks, I guess.
Can you please indicate the scale of, or the scope of what you're supporting when you talk about that, and also share what you're doing for user support? Are they, for example, going to the Slack forum, or are they coming to you?
Yeah, so I can speak about that. So at Target, I think we had close to 1,000 users last time we counted for Spinnaker, and that's application team users. Our first Spinnaker installation had about 300 app teams. I think our current Spinnaker application actually downsized the number of app teams we needed, or applications within there, so it's about 120 right now, just apps. And then they might have a number of components in there. As far as how many people are actually looking at it from day to day doing ops work, not that many. So our first Spinnaker installation didn't get touched for about 8 months, and it just kept going and going and going. Our current GCP deployment of GCP has been looked at 2 or 3 times in the last 4 months. It just gets version bumps whenever we find a bug, and it's usually already been patched, so we just bump all our stuff up. That's maybe an hour or 2 of just doing validation testing, making sure everything's still working. Currently, we have 6 engineers dedicated to looking at fixing upstream bugs with the OpenStack driver, looking at adding new features, for example, X509 certificate parsing. But that's all work that we're finally freed up from doing the operational Spinnaker work. We probably spent a good 6 to 8 months just learning how to configure Spinnaker, how to run it well, how to do HA deployments. We migrated from doing Gradle jobs that created RPMs out of the install dist Gradle command, for example. We used that to deploy RPMs onto VMs that ran Spinnaker on 2 different VMs, one for Cloud Driver and one for everything else, basically. Then we switched over to GKE. That actually dropped down our operational load, or how much time we spent operating it, significantly. Now we switched over to Halyard. Our initial Halyard discovery took us about 3 weeks. Now we have handed off the ability to deploy Spinnaker to other teams. So they're able to run local Spinnakers on their minikubes, on their laptops if they need to do development. They're able to launch our lab environment if they want, and they're able to redeploy our prod environment for us. So we're actually not even deploying our prod environment right now.
Yeah, within Netflix, I guess we have a team of 12 now, plus Andy, or including you. I can't remember.
I don't count.
And at any given time, one of those people is on call to support the entirety of Netflix using Spinnaker. We monitor a Slack channel. We can get paged. Most of the time, it's not something that we dread as a task of being on call. It's usually, certainly recently, it's been pretty good. We've had our ups and downs for sure. And I guess the big difference between Netflix and most of the other people who are installing Spinnaker is that we're not pinned to the open source version, so we tend to be right on the bleeding edge, and we're probably deploying various different services within Spinnaker maybe 10 times a day. So I guess we have a lot more churn in terms of finding bugs and having to be reactive to that. But I'd say, you know, even at the worst times, maybe 3 or 4 people are working on ops issues at a given time, and that's pretty unusual. Would you agree with that, Rob, or am I?
So basically, we're the canary for the rest of the world.
To kind of expand on that, the scale that we have is about 2,500 applications and probably an equal number of developers that we wind up supporting. So most of the responsibility in being on call is just kind of fielding questions like, how do I set up my pipeline to do this? Why isn't my expression working? Help me understand why my application's not going into service, that kind of thing. That usually takes up like 90% of your on-call rotation, and then about 10% of the time is actually like doing operations things, which would be like.
Yeah, and to expand on how many users, well, so we have 1,000 users, but it's like the 5% or the bottom 5% and the top 5% that are asking a lot of questions about, does Spinnaker do this? How does this work in Spinnaker? And we have 24 people on our team. We have 2 people on call for a length of 1 day at the current time, and they're the people that are fielding those questions, but they're not really specific to Spinnaker a lot of the time. It's like, how does GCP work? And so I would say maybe 50% of the questions are Spinnaker specific. And yeah, I think we also have 1 person that's completely dedicated to support on our team, and they help with the migration efforts that we have. I'm trying to think. There's another part that I wanted to comment on. Oh yeah, our teams don't go up into the upstream Slack channel. They all keep their questions internal.
We have about 15 teams, so about 50, 60 developers that are actually users of Spinnaker. As far as operating it, it's mainly my team, so I have a team of 4, plus myself, that kind of is responsible for keeping Spinnaker. Nothing goes to the upstream Slack, it's all handled internally. But to that point, our pipelines are pretty simple, and we work very closely with our platform engineering team to really define the types of applications that are being deployed. So whether it's an API or service, since we're doing things just off the Kubernetes manifest, our teams are very comfortable writing manifests there, and we translate those into pipelines. So onboarding a new application is relatively straightforward, as long as it conforms to our spec for this is a service and how it's set up in Kubernetes. We translate that into a pipeline through an automated job. So there's very little operational support that has to be done on a day-to-day basis with our process.
I asked for the microphone and immediately forgot what I was going to say.
We also do a lot of support, and the delivery team owns the CI system, the artifact management, and also the PaaS. So when we get questions, it's quite divided in different topics. But we have to help people with Spinnaker. We have the same challenge as you, like telling people that the deployment doesn't work because the instance does not get healthy and the ELB. It's not specific to Spinnaker that it doesn't start, but it's sometimes challenging to explain this.
Yeah.
Could I ask for clarification on, are these team sizes dedicated just to Spinnaker, or are they your ops departments also working on other random requests in the meantime?
But just to repeat the question.
Yeah. So the question was, are these team sizes dedicated entirely towards Spinnaker, or are they just ops teams that are also doing Spinnaker requests? For us, it's DevOps teams, devs, tooling teams, whatever you want to call it, that is fielding requests, where no one's dedicated towards Spinnaker on our team.
Yeah,
I bet there's...
It's just mirrors that. It's a DevOps team. We just happen to be responsible for anything as far as delivery. And so Spinnaker is a component of it, but we don't dedicate anyone towards strictly Spinnaker.
I bet some people will want some clarification on Edwin's 24 people number.
So I'm going to plug what Target does on our team, which is really cool. So every quarter, we decide to scramble teams. And so we have 4 team leads at the moment. We pick which topics we're going to work on for the quarter, and the rest of the 20 people on our team go and pick where they want to go work. So from quarter to quarter, I have a completely new set of people working on Spinnaker most of the time. And so we do a little bit of ramp up trying to get people familiar with the code base, how the microservices work. But maybe towards the tail end, the 2 months of the quarter, we're actually looking at fixing ops bugs or looking at adding new features to Spinnaker. And so overall, we have a pretty wide breadth of knowledge within Spinnaker operating it, but also using Spinnaker on the app team perspective, as lots of our team members then go on to help people supporting Spinnaker. It gets, I guess we have probably maybe 6 people that are not familiar super well with Spinnaker now, I guess, on the team, but like eventually they'll come into my rotation, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm working with the same, trying to get Øyvind into Spinnaker really hard. We have the same pattern with the on-call person is in charge of support, and we spend at least 1 resource on support and operational stuff. I think it's like 1.5 person is working each week on this.
Capital One, we in Spinnaker space, we have our own tool that is built on top of Spinnaker. It's a Cloud One view. So the Spinnaker, we are using it not only for just continuous delivery, but as some of you may have attended the presentation yesterday, it's a certified continuous delivery. So a lot of changes are being made. Many extensions are being added to that platform. So we have core team of 6 working day in, day out on that platform, while working with all our digital line of business and also 6 other lines of business onboarding onto the platform. So we have other team of 4 people doing maybe 50% of their time doing all those enhancements as well as support to some extent. We do Slack, internal Slack channel support, and we have a daily office hours, 1 hour, and a dedicated point of contact person per LOB that works with either that group of applications to onboard or deal with any of the questions or help them. Questions are not on the Spinnaker how it works, but it is more on how they can add a reusable pipeline template for their group of applications for reuse, those kind of things, because not all infrastructure is API based. We have several other types of infrastructure, so some teams are interested in contributing back to that internal community, those templates. So a lot of time is spent with collaboration, getting them onto the platform as well as taking the contributions. The other thing I would like to call out is there are several extensions and also possible contribution back that we are thinking into the community, and I have a core team that's joining me today. Here I want to have this community put a name to the face. If we can stand the core team, that is Raji, Andrew, Raja, Ritesh, and Kamdang. That is our core team supporting entire Capital One, Spinnaker platform, several applications, day in, day out. That's extending the platform, supporting the platform for certified continuous delivery for
I guess what we see when we help a company is the existing ops or DevOps team takes over Spinnaker, and it's always enough. They don't have to add more resources. And a lot of the work that they do, like you mentioned, is things along training the company on how to use the new system, how to integrate with their, they do work to integrate Spinnaker into their current systems, do training programs to help educate the rest of the company, things like that. But after a while, less resources are needed to maintain the platform than before they had Spinnaker.
So about 3 months ago, I think we hired a technical writer. The technical writer's big job was to clean up our existing documentation that was centered around how does Target use Spinnaker, as well as how does Target use our current cloud platform and all the other tooling that we have built around. And so I would say probably a good 30 to 50% of the time is just learning how the teams are using Spinnaker and then writing the technical documentation that is I guess I've never actually looked at the docs on the website for how to use Spinnaker, but I imagine like it's going to be different from company to company how you're actually deploying your applications.
Yeah, and I guess to kind of reiterate some of their points, the amount of effort we spend on supporting Spinnaker, I think is much less than the amount of effort we spend on educating our developers to use Spinnaker, and that becomes a lot of what the team ends up doing. And we use Slack for internal chat, and I feel like 90% of the things we get is Spinnaker slow, which is something on our end we just need to tune, or my app is failing, why is Spinnaker broken? And we're like, no, your health check's failing. Like, reiterating that point has taken so much effort on us that like Spinnaker isn't broken, your app is broken.
So if you do have questions, just raise your hand in the audience. Definitely want to include everyone. And I will. That's Stephen.
So, I need a mic. I'd like to understand what, for sizing, what are you guys using currently? And if, once again, if you could give background of what scale of deployments that's supporting. And also anything you can share about how you got there. You probably had a baseline of a machine profile that you started with. You ran out of memory, or wasn't enough CPU to scale. If you could run through your actual setup, that would help. Thanks.
So our Spinnaker is, well, we have 4 different installations of Spinnaker. We have a dedicated single server for our PCI compliant account, and then we have 3 different staging ones. And then our production is probably somewhere around 75 servers. when we do a red black of Cloud Driver, we wind up running 96 servers. So those are mostly like C3, 4x larges in AWS. We have quite a few Redis instances that we run ourselves. And I think we could probably tune that down if we put of effort into JVM tuning, which is starting to become a thing. But that's kind of where we're at. But that's also serving hundreds of thousands of AWS instances, Titus jobs, and that sort of thing. So there's quite a lot of stuff that we're indexing, which amount of power.
Yeah, our scale is smaller. We have one Spinnaker cluster. Each microservice is split off. Each probably has 2 to 3 instances, depending on how much I trust it. Most of those are like T2 mediums or C4 larges. The biggest bottleneck we had would be Cloud Driver. We originally started with like the packaged AMI that Netflix provides. We tried to split it off and failed, and then we were just like, let's get Spinnaker stable. And once it's stable, we started splitting off all these microservices. But Cloud Driver, we run read-only instances behind a load balancer that like every other service hits, and then we have multiple other Cloud Drivers that are 2 accounts per Cloud Driver that are doing the writes into Redis. Because like if we tried to put all of our accounts on one, it would explode. Ideally, I think we need a Cloud Driver for each account. There may be better ways to handle it, but Cloud Driver is definitely the first thing we had to split off and start worrying about scale with.
Caching per account.
I don't know.
So if you had a bigger installation, would I be able to watch Netflix over GoGo when I'm flying?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, we're definitely on a smaller scale. We practically can run on Raspberry Pis.
I've run it on Raspberry Pis actually. You need to. Yeah.
We should talk. All right, we should definitely talk. We run it in Kubernetes with some other things, but it's essentially like T2 mediums and just a handful of nodes. So.
We're running with separate Redis for all the services, and most of them are easy. Fiat has one write cluster and one read cluster. Cloud Driver has one cluster which is doing the indexing, and that's 6 fairly large instances. Last week I deployed it with no memory settings. That didn't go too well, so now it has memory settings again. But we don't have insanely large. I don't remember how large the instances are, but 6 instances there and 3 instances or 4 in the read-write cluster. So Orca and Gate hits the same cluster for doing reads and Orca writes. Yeah.
Is nobody else running it on Kubernetes? Jeez, okay. You should all run Spinnaker on Kubernetes, like I actually mean it. As far as instance sizes, I don't know what they're like. At most, we give Cloud Driver 2 gigs of RAM. We scale it out to 3 replica sets, and then every other component we scale out to 3 replica sets just for HA deployments. They use about half a gig of RAM each on their limits, and then I think every other service has about 500 millicores, and then 1 core it's 1.75 actual cores in Kubernetes is dedicated to Cloud Driver. So Cloud Driver is the only thing that I've started to see performance issues on at our scale. It usually is solved by just giving it more resources. We started to see that it was having a hard time looking up information from Redis for a little bit, so we upped the Redis size. Do you remember how big that got?
I think I gave it.
It wasn't too much.
1,000 gigs.
I didn't even give it a full core.
Yeah, I don't think we gave it a full core on the Kubernetes cluster. So
maybe just at the high limit.
I think our GKE clusters that run our infrastructure and components are pretty tiny, and they're just pretty efficient.
I think that 3 M4 XLs with about 300 pipelines running a day sits at 15% CPU utilization most of the time. So that's more than enough to keep you happy.
We have different installations. It's as someone was saying earlier, we have different regions. Production region, our stack is relatively smaller compared to the sizes that I'm hearing. It's a 3-node cluster in production. That looks like we're the only ones running our family. We are using R3 large. And 3 instances with one write rep write and then 2 read replicas of Redis. We use Elastic Cache and Redis. We have that in production stack, and we run this in 3-node clusters, 3 AZs, active passive. So we have the passive stack in West region, but as I said, it's active passive. We have a sandbox environment, and where teams can try their code out before taking it to the production if they want to create new pipelines and stuff. And we have a dev environment, dev for our internal code team. And initially we had few other stacks, but because of the optimization initiative that we also are running parallel to just cut down on our unnecessary spend, we have optimized our stack in lower environments, but production is the only one running with our family. Our cost operations, it already talked about members and the teams. As of last month on the Spinnaker, we're 6,000 per month that we are spending on the Spinnaker stack across all the regions, test and production. With reserved instances that we acquired recently, I'm expecting that it would go down a bit low next month onwards.
So it's clear there's a relationship between the size of your particular, let's say, infrastructure in the cloud and your Spinnaker installation. So something to plan on as your footprint grows, so does your Spinnaker footprint. I thought was also interesting, a question that comes up frequently is like installing Spinnaker. How do I install it, right? Netflix already said, hey, look, we run off head, and then there's different ways to install it. But it's been clear based on some of the things you all are saying that once it's up and running, it's no big deal. But how do you deal, like how did you install it? How do you get patch, how do you patch it? Are you also just pulling it from, head and whatnot? What are your strategies for keeping up to date with the community?
I recently changed my strategy. I started asking Cameron when I have things now, because he knows all the properties of Spinnaker. But yeah, we just worked on it and figured out how the properties were set, and we were basically just leveraging that forever. We have Spinnaker config packages for like one package for Spinnaker config, one for Eiger config, one for gate config, and all our overrides are like that.
Yeah, so configuring Spinnaker is by far the hardest part of Spinnaker, in my opinion. And we ended up many iterations, so we would have like TGT, Spinnaker, and then the component that we were modifying, and we would just have the like Roscoe-local, the gate-local, and we would override all the defaults that were provided by upstream. And then that worked pretty well. Like we were doing our Kubernetes deployments with manifest files that way for the longest time. We were building copies of upstream. We were using the upstream install disk commands to create basically the containers. And then we were uploading that and reusing those in our Kubernetes cluster. We switched to Halyard in the last month and a half and have found our lives to become significantly easier. I guess it's a little annoying when I have to when I push a feature and then I have to wait for it to come to the release because I'm not persistent enough in asking. But you could run on nightly if you really want them. Otherwise, our GCP Spinnaker runs pretty close to head. Whenever there's a component like deck that gets updated, we more or less have to upgrade everything else, is what I have found, or when gate gets updated, or a few other components require a bunch of bumps. And so to guarantee that that doesn't break, we usually run through example pipelines, and making sure that you can still edit the pipeline is one that I've found that happens often.
We just stick, once you guys started doing Spinnaker 1.0 and these packaged versions, we just stick with whatever's in the latest version. And we found that to be a lot better. Beforehand, we were just kind of guesswork, and occasionally we'd like update Igor, and now we have to update everything else to play together. And now there's these packaged versions. We've had a lot of luck. Just let's go with the version that's packaged together. You know, we're not deploying through Halyard, we're deploying through our own tooling and through Spinnaker. But sticking to the versions that are defined within that release has been really beneficial for us.
We are yet to explore Halyard, but we are deploying using our own Ansible-based scripting. How often we do that, our cadence currently to get all the latest has been alternate PIs. So it's like every 3 months we look at it. We would want to get into much more frequent cadence, but it's where we are currently in our journey. With the Orca version 3, we realized that we may end up doing a bit more, and maybe going forward, we'll do it across all the Spinnaker services that we are using more frequently, but it's all alternate PIs currently.
Halyard is awesome. Thank you, Lars. Really appreciate it. Before that, we actually had worked with Kenzan to initially onboard us with our installation of Spinnaker, largely because they were working on some things with Terraform and bootstrapping Spinnaker. So essentially, they kind of wrote the Halyard upgrade process for us before Halyard actually got released. So thank you, Kenzan. But then, since going to Halyard and the versioned dependencies and actually versioned releases of Spinnaker with Kubernetes has been relatively easy for us to roll out and update.
We have a handy mix of local forks and upstream packages, which is hard to maintain. And we are working hard on, or the direction is to use upstream packages for all components. And then we will start investing in using Halyard, because it seems really convenient now that it's so many commits into Spinnaker to actually not read them all, just consume them. So yeah, looking forward to that day.
Just to install, we use Terraform, or we've been using Terraform for a long time, and then to upgrade, we use Spinnaker to deploy Spinnaker. About every 2 weeks, we roll forward to the last known working nightly build, I guess, and then stress test and internally dog food, and just keep that cycle going every 2 weeks. But we use Spinnaker to deploy Spinnaker.
Any questions from the audience?
I still have the conch, so I'm going to ask another question.
Steven, we should have switched.
So we put a concerted effort with 1.0 release toward documentation, Halyard, the formal release process, which patches them together, monitoring support out of there, obviously security, authentication, authorization. We felt like that was a good line in the sand for us to get us to the finish, to the start line, right? So as far as operating Spinnaker goes, security, manageability, et cetera, what's missing?
You could install Prometheus with Halyard. I'd be very happy.
Wow, that's it.
If
Yeah.
it doesn't work perfectly, we PR that, and then it works.
You can sorry. There is in Spinnaker monitoring. There is a package. Okay, you're aware of that. But there is a package to install Prometheus and Prometheus support. But it's not a enterprise installation of the server, if that's what you're getting at.
If you want to find more about that, Eric's giving a presentation at 10 on monitoring and metrics.
I think it's at 11.
It's at 11, because actually it is at 11. There's a question down here if someone wants to toss it down. Oh, nice.
Actually, going back to the documentation and the Halyard side, I noticed our documentation has regressed a bit on Spinnaker internals with the 1.0 release. We've lost some documentation about like the subnet naming conventions isn't there anymore, and There's also everything is halyard, halyard, halyard now, but how do you successfully use halyard in a distributed operations environment when you've got this like .hal directory that contains secrets, and how do you secure that, and how do you share that, and how do you collaborate with that? Hasn't really been described.
So that's great feedback. That's exactly what we're asking for. So there's two ways you can submit that. One is there's on each page there's a button. On each page there's a button for something like send feedback or something like that. So please aggressively, we look at those, press the button, say here's what is missing. At worst, we'll have a tracking issue for things that are missing. We want to go to fulfill these things. And also we accept pull requests. So you can submit documentation on your own as well if you have specific things.
Yeah, so specifically for how do you use halyard in such a way that it's pretty repeatable, we should do a breakout session for that, because I have lots of thoughts, and I've
That's a
argued
great
with
idea.
a lot of people about how to do it. So
I want to be aware of time because we are actually running over and we have to go. It's 9:53, so you have 30 seconds. Any parting thoughts? Use halyard.
use halyard.
Right, AWS support for halyard.
Provide AWS support for halyard.
We've been looking for somebody to do that for a long time. So
It's not that hard. Just do it.
Target's not going to do it.
I'd rather say use Spinnaker. So if you're not currently using Spinnaker, try it out. It's great software. It'll speed up your business. It's amazing.
Can we have a halyard stage for Spinnaker? We can display Spinnaker with halyard.
Do halyard.
I just want to say thanks for organizing this. The community here is pretty awesome. It's probably, as far as the pace of development, is only second to Kubernetes. So Kubernetes is at a crazy pace, and I think Spinnaker is right behind there as far as the updates and the feedback from the community. So thanks.
Just one thing I wanted to ask Andy and team. You have any plans to open source this?
So parts of Atlas are open source, but the rest of it I doubt will be open source anytime soon.
Because we are switching from Splunk and now to Elk to push all the aggregators and combination of things that we are using to monitor the stack. Wanted to see if leverage Atlas. It was yesterday someone showed it and it was awesome. Thank you. Thank you for bringing this team one forum to exchange all these great ideas. And
I want to encourage everyone to open source your tools. I feel like talking to everyone here, everyone has these internal tools they're using for Spinnaker, and a lot of them are doing similar things. And even if you think your tool is niche or no one will use it, it's still awesome to open source. And I think everyone gleans ideas from these open source projects that maybe have a star on GitHub. So open source your tools and share.
I'm going to extend that and say, if you have ideas for things to improve and ideas of like new features that you want to build, you should jump into Slack and start pinging people. There's no shame in like throwing out ideas, because that's kind of what we're all here for, is innovating and making the product better.
What channel do you
Dev is probably the right place if you're going to be actually doing like development work. If you're just going to like kick around an idea to see if it's a worthwhile endeavor, then that's probably general.
All right, great. So let's get moving to the next session. I appreciate everyone on the panel. Let's give them all a big hand. And I think this conference is a great way of turning virtual strangers into colleagues. So this is it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Are you going? We're going to stay here.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for being on the panel. Thank you very much. It was awesome.